I leaned back in my chair, my eyes sweeping the room filled with beautiful women, and the question gnawed at me. Why did Alex DuPont, of all people, go after my wife? What did she see in him that was worth breaking everything we had? Why did she just leave me? Karen and I had already mapped out what life would look like once the kids were fully grown and not coming back as often. Those days were fast approaching, and we were supposed to finally get some time to ourselves, but clearly, she'd had other plans. A few months ago, I used to picture what our life together would be like once the house was empty, imagining that it would mean more time for Karen and me to reconnect, to be closer. I'd even thought we might rediscover a spark. But then, like a punch in the gut, I realized maybe that wasn't in her plans at all, that she'd already made her choice, and it didn't include me. That thought hit hard, and whatever sadness I'd felt before drained away, leaving only a deep, quiet anger. I could feel the cautious looks from everyone around the table. They glanced at me like they were waiting for me to snap, half worried I might do something crazy. Dee leaned over, his voice tense. "You all right, Paul?" But my gaze drifted over his shoulder, catching sight of a booth across the dance floor where 4 beautiful young women were sitting. Why hadn't Alex picked one of them? I stared at them for a moment, then suddenly let out a laugh that surprised everyone at the table. I laughed so hard it echoed around the room, and people started to look over. Tears filled my eyes as I laughed, realizing that my life had changed, radically and forever. Karen had walked away, and that meant I was free too. Any sense of loyalty or concern I'd had for her feelings was gone. She'd made her bed. Now I was free to make mine. The whole table was watching me. Smiling, I took off my wedding ring and handed it to Tina, who stared at me in shock. "You see, Karen, pass this along," I told her. "I've got things to take care of." Standing up, I tossed a $10 bill onto the table. "That's for my drink. You all seemed so eager to support Karen and her affair, so you can cover the rest." As I walked off, I heard my so-called friends calling out from the club's entrance, probably confused about what I was going to do next. But I'd made up my mind. Any guy who dared to chase after me tonight was asking for a busted nose. While I walked away, I started to think about the way Karen had been so self-centered in her search for a thrill, and now, it was my turn to enjoy myself. When I reached the hotel, I asked the clerk if they had any open suites. She shook her head, explaining that only a honeymoon suite was left, rattling off the long list of amenities. "Perfect. I'll take it," I replied. "I'll keep that suite, and my wife can stay where she is. Charge me for both." She gave me a curious look, like she almost thought I was planning a romantic surprise. When she handed over the key, I made one last request. "Oh, and if my wife comes looking for my room, don't let her have the key. In fact, don't tell her where I am at all." The clerk's brow raised in surprise, but she nodded, saying she'd make sure everyone understood. With that settled, I headed back to our shared room, gathered my things, and left Karen's belongings behind in the trash. Taking the elevator to the top floor, I was blown away by the honeymoon suite, especially the huge balcony with a jacuzzi overlooking the city. I'd even packed a fancy tuxedo in case Karen and I had gone out, but tonight, it was just for me. I threw on the jacket and made my way back to the club, stopping at an ATM to grab some extra cash. By the time I returned, a line had formed outside. Walking up to the doorman with a smile, I slipped him a $100 bill. He didn't hesitate, opening the door and ushering me in. As I stepped inside, I saw my so-called friends still at the table. I scanned the place, hoping to see what had caught my eye earlier. A table near the dance floor with 4 gorgeous women, clearly out for a bachelorette party. No men in sight. That suited me just fine. As I walked past my former table, Tina noticed me and waved, calling my name, but I didn't even look her way. I made my way across the room, stopping in front of the table of women. "How come 4 beautiful ladies are sitting here without company?" I asked, flashing a grin. They all laughed, and the taller brunette, a bit tipsy, chimed in, "We're here for our friend. Some jerk left her for another woman, so we're making sure she has a good time tonight. Well, if you don't mind, I'd be happy to dance with your friend and help her have some fun." I turned to the petite redhead, who smiled and reached for my hand, letting me lead her onto the dance floor. "I'm Paul," I introduced myself as we danced. And how could any guy be foolish enough to lose someone like you? She rolled her eyes, laughing. He's just an idiot, that's all. We danced and talked, and I learned her name was Chloe. She was studying nursing in college and had grown up nearby. A slower song began, and we kept dancing, caught up in the moment. As the music softened, Chloe looked up at me and asked, "So, Paul, are you married?" I admitted that my wife and I weren't together anymore. "Was it your wife I saw dancing with Alex Lavalier earlier?" she asked, raising her brows. I noticed she disappeared right after that dance. I nodded, giving her a wry smile. "Looks like you figured out we'd split right about the same time I did." Chloe returned my smile warmly, and we continued dancing, holding each other close until the song ended. Both of us were fresh from heartbreak, trying to process what it meant to be betrayed by someone we cared about, and in that moment, holding each other just felt nice. When the music stopped, we headed back to her table. Chloe turned to her friends and announced, "I know we planned for a girls-only night, but I'd like Paul to stick around." The tall brunette sitting across from us smirked and teased, "Oh, but we did agree, no guys." Grinning, I jumped in with, "How about a couple of bottles of champagne on me to make up for it?" Chloe smiled at her friends, then added, "And anyway, we all saw Alex DuPont slip out with his wife." All the girls, almost in unison, said, "Didn't see a thing," with mischievous glances. 3 of them scooted around in the booth to make room for me and Chloe. Before I could even ask their names, the blonde beside Chloe piped up, "So, do you two have some kind of open marriage?" "Not at all," I answered firmly. Another blonde chimed in, "Did she say anything to you before she left?" Shaking my head, I replied, "Nothing. Just told me she was going to the restroom, but she snuck out the back with Alex." I thumbed over my shoulder. All my so-called friends helped her cover it up too. Right then, our waitress came by, and I asked if everyone at the table liked champagne. They all smiled, so I ordered 2 bottles of the best they had, which got cheers all around. Before anyone could ask anything else, I introduced myself, and they shared their names, Jenna, Brooke, and Megan, all in nursing school with Chloe. After the champagne arrived, and everyone's glasses were filled, Brooke, the brunette, turned to me and asked, "So, what are you going to do about your wife?" I sighed. As far as I'm concerned, she ended it the second she walked out that door. "You have kids?" one of them asked, and I nodded. "Yeah, a son and a daughter, 15 and 13. But they're getting older and more independent, so I'll deal with things soon enough." Chloe hooked her arm around mine and cheered, "Forget it. Tonight, you're with us." We clinked glasses, drank champagne, and laughed. The night became a blur of jokes, laughter, and dancing. The girls got up to dance with each other or with other guys who wandered by, but Chloe stayed with me, keeping her arm around me. Then, out of nowhere, Brooke looked upset and suddenly stormed away from the table. We turned to see what was happening, spotting Tina by the entrance, clearly there to talk to me. But before Tina could get close, Brooke intercepted her near my old friend's table. We couldn't hear what was said, but we saw Brooke pointing her finger hard against Tina's chest and shouting, making her point clear. Tina's eyes welled up, and she slunk back to her seat. Brooke came back to our table, fuming, while Jenna and Megan gave her high fives. With a grin, she sipped her champagne, turned to me, and declared, "None of those backstabbers are coming near us for the rest of the night." I glanced back at my old table and saw them gathering their things to leave. Tina and Lisa both looked tearful, but none of them glanced in our direction. "Brooke, what happened?" I asked, curious. She shrugged. "That woman worked up the courage to talk to you, so I reminded her exactly what I think of people who cover for cheaters." I chuckled, realizing she'd made a clear impression on them. "Guess they wanted me to forgive Karen so they wouldn't feel guilty," I said. "For that, I think you deserve a kiss." But before I could, Chloe grabbed my face playfully and said, "Oh, don't even think about it," before giving me a deep kiss. The others cheered us on, and as we pulled apart, Chloe gave me a sweet smile. Jenna couldn't resist teasing, "You two should really get a room." I grinned. "Actually, I've got a suite in a hotel nearby. And if I'm guessing right, none of you are in any state to drive. How about we keep this party going?" After settling the bill, we made our way out of the club, Chloe leaning on my arm, while the other girls leaned on us for balance. At the hotel's reception, I ordered 4 more bottles of champagne for the suite. When I mentioned it was a honeymoon suite, the girls burst into laughter. On the elevator ride up, they broke out in the wedding march, making Chloe blush while she held onto me a little tighter. As we got closer to the room, they joked about me carrying Chloe over the threshold. Chloe looked at me with her soft, sparkling eyes and murmured, "You don't have to, unless you want to." With a grin, I opened the door, scooped her up, and carried her inside, where she hugged me tightly, kissing me with surprising passion. The other girls laughed at us, but their teasing stopped as soon as Brooke noticed the jacuzzi on the balcony. Before I even had the chance to set Chloe down, they were already stripping down to their bras and underwear, running to jump in the hot tub. Chloe, still smiling, held my hand as we walked out to join them. A knock at the door signaled the champagne's arrival. I brought the bottles out to the ladies, who were already settled in the jacuzzi, laughing and making jokes. Megan looked at me with a grin and said, "You're a little overdressed for this, don't you think?" I chuckled, explaining that I was just keeping Chloe company for a bit. Her friends playfully teased her to join them in the jacuzzi, but Chloe simply smiled and led me back to the room. As we headed toward the bridal suite, one of her friends jokingly hummed the wedding march from the balcony, laughing uncontrollably. The next morning, I woke up with Chloe wrapped around me and the other 3 women sprawled out across the king-sized bed, all in various states of undress. I guess they must have joined us later in the night. As Chloe and I got out of bed, she looked at me with a gentle smile. "Did you enjoy yourself, Paul?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied. "It was the best night I've had in a long time." She gave me a knowing look. "Any regrets?" "None at all." Chloe grinned and, taking my hand, led me to the shower. "Come with me," she said, excitement in her eyes. It was clear she wanted to share an experience that was completely new for me, something I'd never done with Karen. In the shower, I lifted her, pressing her against the wall as she wrapped her legs around me, and I felt a thrill I'd never known before. It was intense. She reached her peak twice, loud enough to rouse anyone nearby. After we emerged from the shower, we found the other ladies awake, lounging around in good spirits despite their hangovers. They ordered room service and sipped on mimosas. Brooke laughed. "I'm going to have to try that shower. You two made it sound like the best one in the world." The girls erupted into laughter, and Chloe and I exchanged a smile. Once everyone had showered and said their goodbyes, Chloe asked me for a ride home. She nestled close to me in the car, looking thoughtful. "Paul, I know what your wife did was terrible, but you still have the option to make things right with her," she said quietly. "If you decide you're not going back, though, I'd love to see you again." I squeezed her hand. "Chloe, I'd like that. Going back to my wife doesn't feel like an option right now. I had a wonderful time with you. You're exactly what I need right now." When we reached her house, I walked her to the door and kissed her goodbye. As she opened the door, I spotted Brooke on the couch, giving me a wave and a knowing smile. Driving home, I felt the weight of the decision about Karen looming over me. Going to the club had been a knee-jerk reaction, something to pull me out of the hurt she'd caused, and it had worked for a while. It hadn't solved my problems with Karen, but at least it lifted my spirits. When I got home, I sat in the darkened living room, sinking into the chair. My mind drifted to the tough path ahead, figuring out how to end this marriage without hurting the kids any more than they had to be. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a car pull up, then keys turning in the lock. Her voice echoed through the entryway as she called out, "Paul, I'm home." It sounded exactly like she had every time she'd come back from an errand, as if last night hadn't happened. She closed the door and flicked on the light, and I turned to look at her. There she was, just as I remembered. Same blue dress, hair neatly cascading down, rings on her fingers. She looked entirely unchanged, like she hadn't just spent a night with another man. I couldn't believe it. I'd expected to see some sign of guilt or shame, a crack in her facade, but she stood there, smiling gently. "It's just me, same as ever," she said, as though she knew the turmoil running through my head. "Nothing's different. My love for you is as steady as it's always been." I felt a strange detachment as I heard myself reply, "I wish I could say the same." My voice sounded flat, almost unrecognizable. I looked her over, my gaze cold and distant, then gestured toward the stairs. Go upstairs. Take a shower, I said sharply. She hesitated, trying to say something, but then silently obeyed and went upstairs. When she came back down, she was still looking around, and then she asked, Paul, where are my clothes from last night? I replied, I'd guess they're still in the hotel room where you left them. She blinked. You didn't bring them back? No, I said simply, watching as she began to say something but then stopped. Any criticism she might have had was caught in her throat. She knew her own actions would drown out any protest. She looked down, resigned. I pressed on. So, why'd you leave them there, Karen? She let out a long sigh, almost wistful. It was Alex DuPont. He's rich, successful, and could have any woman in that place. When he asked me to dance, I felt like the most desired woman in the room. Her voice softened as she spoke, as if she were savoring the memory. Listening to her, I could see she was lost in her thoughts, reliving moments she'd shared with him, barely acknowledging I was even there. Right then, I realized that she valued that night with Alex more than any moment she'd ever spent with me. I was just there, an afterthought. Do you love him? I asked. She shook her head. No, I don't love him. It was just physical. I love you, Paul. I raised an eyebrow. You hesitated, I pointed out, not letting her dodge the truth. And I know what that look means. If he'd asked, you would have gone with him. She sighed. It was just one night, Paul. It was only physical. Well, I said, my voice hard, that's where this conversation ends. I need time to think. Pack a few things for yourself and for the kids and stay with your parents for the week. But Paul, she started, her voice small. I cut her off. The discussion is over. If you're determined to sort this out immediately, you won't get the outcome you're looking for, Karen shot back, her voice tight with frustration. But I didn't hold back this time. There was anger in my voice and in the look I gave her. She packed her things and left, and as soon as she was out of sight, I set my plan into motion. Seeing her standing there in that familiar blue dress, unchanged, had triggered something deep inside me, a realization that if I wanted to survive this, change was essential. I called my boss and asked for 2 weeks off, then went out and rented a truck. I bought everything I'd need from the hardware store: wood, drywall, paint, and 2 new exterior doors. Back home, I rounded up my tools and got to work. First, I took out the front door and the surrounding windows. After cutting a wider opening, I installed both doors, placing our original one on the right and the new one on the left. Then, I framed a wall down the middle of the entryway, added drywall, and started transforming our home into a duplex. I put in a new back door on the left side, where I planned to add a small kitchen, mirroring the layout of the other side. The office became an extra bedroom on my half, while the dining room became the third bedroom on Karen's side. By the end, each side was nearly identical, aside from the detached garage that Karen would have on her side. I changed the lock and access code on the garage to ensure only I could get in. In the backyard, I put up a fence, dividing it down the middle. Every day, I called the kids to keep them in the loop about the house renovations. Karen tried to talk to me several times, but I told her I wasn't ready to listen. A few days into the project, I picked up the phone and called Chloe, just to hear her voice and maybe plan some time together. I thought you'd forgotten about me, she teased. Not a chance. In fact, I can't stop thinking about you, I replied, smiling to myself. How'd you like to take a little trip with me? Don't tease me, she laughed. I'm serious, I said. How does a weekend getaway sound? Just us? Really? She asked, her interest clearly piqued. Yes, I said. How about the Bahamas? That sounds incredible, she replied. Can you get away this weekend? We could fly out on Thursday and come back Tuesday, I asked, trying not to sound too eager. Yes, yes, yes. Let me grab my phone and passport. We can buy everything else when we get there, she agreed, excited. After a few more minutes of planning, we hung up, and I finalized the travel arrangements. It wasn't a cheap trip, but I figured it was worth it. If Karen filed for divorce, she'd end up with half of our savings anyway, and the idea of indirectly using that money for a getaway with Chloe made me smile. I quickly transferred all our savings to a new account in my name and redirected my salary to it, just in case Karen tried to access it. For 16 hours a day, I worked on the house, putting up walls and dividing every shared space I could. By Wednesday, I'd managed to paint and trim the central wall on Karen's side. I knew I'd eventually have to split the utilities, gas, water, and electricity, but for now, we shared those, so Karen couldn't cut me off. That night, I texted Karen, telling her to bring the kids home the next morning. On Thursday morning, I sat outside, waiting in a chair as they pulled into the driveway. I watched them get out, confusion spreading across their faces as they looked at the house. Sarah was the first to speak. "Dad, what's going on?" I grinned. "I turned our place into a duplex. What do you think?" They all just stared at me, stunned. "Don't worry," I said, laughing. "The right side's done. I've even moved your things into your new rooms." I led them through the new layout while Karen silently handled their bags. They were speechless as I guided them through the updated house. "But, Dad, this living room is a lot smaller," Ethan pointed out, looking around. "It's all right. You won't even notice it after a while. And I've got plans for a garage on the other side and maybe even a pool with a jacuzzi someday," I promised, which finally drew some smiles from the kids. Karen urged them to unpack, her eyes meeting mine as if she was eager for a conversation, but I ignored her and helped the kids settle in, making sure they had everything they needed. Once they'd unpacked, I brought out sandwiches from a nearby deli, and we gathered around the kitchen table for lunch. Sarah's curiosity was too much to hold back. "Dad, what's all this about?" she asked, glancing at Karen, who had clearly been evasive with the kids for the past few days. "Oh, we're getting close to an empty nest," I explained casually, "just making a few adjustments to be ready." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Dad, maybe you could have talked to us first, to see how we felt about it." "Well," I said, grinning at Karen, "this was actually your mom's idea. She thought we needed a change, something different." Sarah turned to her, surprised. "Mom, why would you make such a big decision without telling us?" "Yeah, Mom, don't you care what we think?" Ethan chimed in. Karen looked flustered, trying to gather her thoughts. "It was just a misunderstanding. Your father took what I said too literally." I looked at her, unable to hold back a smirk. "I don't know, Karen. You seemed pretty certain at the time. When I saw just how determined you were to split things up, I realized there was no going back," I said, watching Karen's face fall, her eyes misting up before she left the room. Ethan looked at me and asked, "What's going on with Mom? She's been crying over everything." I shrugged and suggested he ask her himself. Before Sarah could probe further, I told them I'd be going out of town for a bit, but would call every evening to check in, even if I wasn't reachable during the day. I kissed them goodbye and headed out the door, wondering if they noticed that I hadn't gone to say goodbye to their mother, who'd stayed in the bedroom. Picking up Chloe, we hit the road. It was an amazing getaway, first-class flights, a beautiful resort, and 5-star treatment. Sun, sand, waves, incredible food and drinks. Chloe was completely in her element, clearly savoring every moment, and I felt at ease in a way I hadn't in ages. By the time we returned, we were both bronzed and very familiar with each other. When I dropped her off on Tuesday, she pulled me in for a lingering kiss. "Want to stay one more night?" she asked, her eyes bright. "I'd love to, but you have classes in the morning," I replied with a smile. "Call me before bed. I need to hear your voice." After a final kiss, I drove home, feeling content. The night before, she'd said she could see herself falling for me, and I had to admit, the feeling was mutual. Pulling up to the house, I saw Karen's car in her driveway, so I parked on the street to avoid her. As I was unpacking, she knocked on my door. "You're back," she said, her tone neutral. "Yes, I am," I replied. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure. What's on your mind?" I responded. "Can I come in?" "No," I said firmly. "This is my space, and you're not welcome here. Ever." My words hit her hard, and she retreated, stunned, back to her side of the house. It became crystal clear in that moment that living here with her, even with the duplex setup, wasn't going to work. Later, we sat at her kitchen table. "Paul, I love you," she said, her voice trembling. I want things to go back to the way they were. That's not going to happen, I replied bluntly. Why not? She asked, desperation creeping into her tone. Because, Karen, if you haven't noticed, you did something that changed the way I feel about you. That doesn't just go away, I explained. That shouldn't define us, she argued, looking at me with pleading eyes. Actually, it does, I said, my voice steady. Nothing can erase what happened or how it's made me feel. But yes, I still love you, I admitted, taking a breath. But think about it. Imagine we were out on a date with friends, and you left me to go off with another guy, only to spend the whole night and next morning with him. If that had happened on our first date, do you really think there would have been a second? But Paul, she said, grasping at straws, it was Alex. I don't care who it was, I replied, unmoved. You chose him over me. You chose to sneak out of the club and spend the night with him. It was just one night, Paul. You've had my whole life to know that I love you, she said, sounding frustrated. One man shows interest, and suddenly I mean nothing to you? Does that mean I should keep you away from every famous person who crosses our path? I shot back, my voice heavy with sarcasm. There's a marathon this weekend. Will you sleep with the winner? Paul, that's not fair, she protested, sounding indignant. Now you want fairness? I asked calmly. Now you want a chance to justify what you did, to talk me out of my anger, to somehow make it my fault for feeling betrayed? You want fairness in a relationship where, as it seems, only I'm expected to be fair. I reached for her hand, and she reluctantly took it. We locked eyes, and I knew it was time to drive the point home. Karen needed to understand exactly where we stood and what our future relationship, or lack of one, would look like. It's too late, Karen, I said quietly. Too late for us. It's too late, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Karen, I said, my tone unwavering. It's too late. She hesitated, her face clouded with sadness. I found someone else, she confessed, almost defiantly. No, I replied, surprising her. Karen pulled her hands back, caught off guard. Do you know who it is? She asked, almost challenging me. Oh, I'm sure Tina and the others filled you in on the redhead I danced with. The one who held me close, I confirmed, watching her reaction. She's the one who took your place on the anniversary you chose to discard. A flicker of sadness crossed Karen's face, and I saw her trying to piece it all together. It was obvious that Tina had sent Karen photos of Chloe and me dancing, looking like we were more than just casual acquaintances. Karen's voice trembled with barely concealed anger. Are you doing this to get back at me? Showing off some 24-year-old girl, just to even the score? Actually, she's 21, I said, unable to resist. And we spent 4 days in the Bahamas. Remember that dream vacation we always talked about? It was amazing. I could feel the smile creeping across my face as I recalled the trip, which only seemed to fuel Karen's anger. She stared at me, her expression hardening, and I knew that my smugness was pushing her further over the edge. But then I remembered the kids and took a steadying breath, forcing my grin to fade, trying to keep my composure. Her eyes flashed with fury, and I could tell she was preparing to unleash a torrent of accusations. But then, seeing my calm expression, she seemed to realize that I was expecting every word she was about to say. She paused, her anger slowly draining. She let out a long sigh, shut her mouth, and placed her hand on the table. We sat there in silence, locked in a tense stare. I could see she wanted to lash out, to berate me for my choices, but she knew she had no moral ground to stand on. The leverage she had relied on for so long, our love and trust, was gone, tossed aside for one fleeting night. And now, it dawned on her that she had lost more than she'd bargained for. I could tell that when she chose to spend the night with Alex, she thought it was a small indulgence, a way to cash in on years of our marriage. But now, sitting across from me, she finally understood the real price of that choice. Karen sat quietly for a moment, her hands clasped on the table as she stared off into the distance. It doesn't matter. I love you, she finally said, her voice soft but resolute. Yes, you keep saying that, I replied, not hiding my frustration. But why should I value your love when my love clearly didn't mean much to you? After what you did, Why should I care about your love? I don't want to lose you, she murmured, sounding desperate. Well, I said, my tone sharp. I don't know how you thought you could destroy my trust so completely and still hold on to me. You took me for granted, Karen, and now you don't deserve me. She looked lost, as if trying to understand what had gone so wrong. I'm going to my place, I told her, standing up. I've still got work to finish on the house. I'll be back for dinner with you and the kids, but please, don't bother me until then. I left the room, leaving Karen behind in tears. Walking away was harder than I wanted to admit. There was a part of me that ached to hold her, to find comfort in the way things used to be. But I knew that version of Karen, my wife, was gone. What we'd had was irreparably broken, replaced by memories of what could have been. Memories she'd thrown away with one careless decision. Later, before dinner, I took the kids over to my side of the house to show them around. I pointed out the kitchen and explained how I planned to replace the back wall with a glass one, overlooking the pool. They seemed concerned as they looked at the fence now dividing the backyard, realizing this side was mine. I showed them where their new rooms would be on my side. Dad, why do I need 2 rooms here? Ethan asked, looking puzzled. Because this side is going to be my home, and the other side will be your mom's, I explained, meeting Sarah's curious gaze. Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced? She asked, her voice small. Mom won't give us any answers, no matter how many times we ask, Ethan added, frustration in his tone. No, we're just separated, I said, trying to reassure them. I don't want to be a weekend dad, so I thought it'd be best to split the house. You two can choose which side you want to live on. Just as we were about to keep going, Karen appeared at the door to announce dinner was ready. We ate in near silence, tension thick in the air. The kids were picking up on more than we'd given them credit for. Ethan suddenly blurted out, I'll move in with Dad once he's done with my room. Karen's face showed her shock. Dad told you we're splitting up, he added, looking directly at her. No, Karen protested, trying to hold back tears. It's just a misunderstanding, and we're still working through it. Sarah slapped her hand down on the table, her voice rising. Who's actually changing, though? I want to know. She and Ethan looked back and forth between us, searching for answers. Karen avoided my gaze, staring at her plate, but when her eyes welled up, the kids seemed to get their answer. I told them gently that their mom was just tired and needed some rest. Then, I led Karen back to the bedroom, helped her undress, and tucked her into bed. I kissed her forehead, like comforting a child after a bad dream, then turned off the light and closed the door. My mind shifted to seeing Karen now more like a grown child who'd made a grave mistake and was facing its lifelong consequences. I realized that while a part of me would always care for her, she was no longer a central figure in my life or my thoughts. That space was gone. First, I checked on Ethan in his room, where he was lying on his bed, messaging friends. When I asked if he wanted to talk, he just shook his head. In Sarah's room, I found her fuming and tearful. Why did she do this, Dad? She asked, her voice shaking. You'll have to ask her, I said, my heart breaking a bit. Forgiveness doesn't come easy. Then, I don't know if I can forgive her either, she said quietly. I understand, I replied, but I want us to still be a family. We are, she insisted. I just won't share a room with Mom anymore. We hugged, exchanged I love yous, and I went back to my side of the house. This was our new normal. Since I usually left for work before the kids woke up, our mornings didn't change much. Karen and I continued to split duties, taking the kids to their various activities and events. Family dinners happened in Karen's half of the house whenever we could manage them. Karen kept trying to bring up our situation, asking for weekly talks, but I kept shutting her down. I had no interest in talking it through. School events felt different. I made a point of avoiding Karen, and if she tried to approach me, I'd excuse myself to the restroom and find another seat when I returned. I was rarely left on my own for long, as other single or divorced friends seemed drawn to me, all asking about our status. I'd respond each time that we were separated. Meanwhile, I started investing in new things for my half of the house. A large TV, a sleek entertainment system, kitchen upgrades, and new furniture that gave my side a modern, bachelor-style look. I even bought a high-end convertible, sparing no expense. One day, Karen couldn't hold back anymore. Paul, can we afford all of this? The car must have cost a fortune. My old car was 8 years older than yours, I reminded her. I needed an upgrade. You've replaced your car twice as often as I have, so I figured it was time to catch up with something nice. I gave her a pointed look. And about all the other stuff, did you think I'd be content to live in a rundown place? She hesitated. Well, what about the furniture? I'd be willing to share it with you. It's fine, I replied, brushing it off. Your taste in furniture never appealed to me anyway. She looked a bit hurt. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because I wanted you to be happy, I answered simply, feeling the truth settle between us. Furniture wasn't ever a big deal to me, I said, letting Karen absorb that for a moment. And don't worry about finances. We're in good shape, the house is paid off, and once the kids move out, my side will be too big for me anyway. I'm planning to rent it out for some extra income, so money won't be an issue. Karen gave me one of her flirtatious smiles, that someone's getting lucky look, and patted my shoulder. I'm not complaining, she said lightly. I actually like your new car, and you look great in the new clothes. Thanks, I replied, though I can't take all the credit. Ethan and Sarah had their eyes on a convertible, and Chloe helped me pick out the clothes and furniture. Turns out we have similar tastes. At Chloe's name, Karen's smile faltered, and her hand dropped from my shoulder. Oh, I was just curious, she said, her voice cooler, before turning to walk away. I hadn't meant to throw Chloe's name in Karen's face, but the reality was that Chloe had become a big part of my life. And I was realizing that I thought about her a lot more than I worried about Karen's feelings. Chloe started coming over to my side of the house more often, and soon enough, Ethan decided to make one of the rooms on my side his main bedroom. Sarah, who mainly stayed with Karen, began spending more time with Chloe too, seeing her almost as an older sister. Soon, Chloe was with me most weekends and even many weeknights. The only friction arose when I invited Chloe to join us for family dinners for the second time. Karen was polite enough, but it was clear she didn't want this to be a regular thing. The next day, as I was heading out for work, Karen stopped me. Paul, I appreciate our talk, but could you not bring your girlfriend to family dinners? That time is supposed to be for us, with the kids. All right then, going forward, I'll skip family dinners when Chloe's not there, I replied. And I'll leave an open invitation for the kids to join us if they'd like. That's not fair, Paul, Karen protested. Dinner is the only chance we have to be a family together. So we're talking about fairness now, Karen? I asked. Let's be honest here. Chloe is becoming a big part of my life, and I want her involved. She gets along well with the kids, so excluding her from family dinners doesn't feel fair to anyone. Her, me, or the kids. If you insist on excluding her, you're excluding me too. But Paul, Karen, your idea of honesty has always been self-serving. You never cared about fairness when you slipped out the back door with Alex DuPont, I said, keeping my voice steady. Even though we no longer live together, it surprised me how much Karen still thought she could easily manipulate me. You gave up integrity that night, Karen. So if you don't like it, maybe fairness would mean you cook for everyone on my side. Chloe loves to cook and is great at it. Tears filled Karen's eyes as she looked down. I'm sorry I brought it up. Chloe is welcome to join us anytime she likes, she said softly. After I finished the pool and hot tub, Ethan started spending more time outside, especially when Chloe's friends Jenna, Brooke, and Megan came over to hang out by the pool. The three of them took turns flirting with him, each trying to see who could make him blush the most, and their friendly competition got a bit heated, with them wearing increasingly daring swimsuits. Brooke, who had a natural advantage with her curves, finally won when she kissed Ethan in the pool, pressing herself against him. It took Ethan a full 10 minutes before he could leave the pool, despite the cold water. He'd been the clear winner in their game, and his confidence soared, eventually leading him to find a girlfriend at school. Once Brooke and the girls met her, they treated her like the luckiest girl in the world. Chloe truly had some amazing friends. And no, I never allowed Karen to come over to my side of the house. I didn't want her presence complicating things between Chloe and me. Sadly, a few years later, Chloe graduated high school, and our relationship started winding down. I could sense it that day at Megan's wedding, where we went as a couple. Chloe looked beautiful, and we had a wonderful time, but I could see the tension in her eyes. I was becoming more of a provider than a partner to her, and while I didn't mind the age gap, I knew she was bothered by it. Our relationship had been fantastic, full of laughter and honesty, and we'd spent countless weekends together. Our families had even gotten to know each other. But now there was a quiet tension we couldn't ignore. When Chloe mentioned she might relocate, I asked if she'd consider marrying me. She hesitated, explaining she wanted to follow a family tradition that involved a different path. I sensed her internal conflict. While I was everything she wanted in many ways, I wasn't the right age for her. I felt a pang, realizing she might be taking me for granted, believing men like me would always be around. I subtly reminded her of Karen's mistake, thinking the same way, but Chloe brushed it off, insisting she'd never make that kind of error. In that moment, I knew our paths were diverging. Still, I understood her choice. I told her that if she ever changed her mind, I'd be there for her. Maybe in the future, the age gap wouldn't matter so much. I cherished every memory with Chloe, grateful for her honesty, something Karen had never shown me. Unlike Karen, she'd never tried to deceive or manipulate me. As for Karen's friends, who were once my friends too, they occasionally tried convincing me to reconcile with her. But their arguments seemed hollow. After everything, there was no going back. Whenever the husbands tried to convince me to reconcile with Karen, I'd counter with the hard truth of what it's like to be betrayed by your spouse. Somehow, they seemed to think that cheating was understandable, even acceptable. After all, I'd witnessed their reactions that night. In fact, I suspected that it wasn't random chance that had led us to that particular club where Alex DuPont was known to hang out. Maybe I'd just been unlucky enough to be married to the most attractive woman in their group. Call it karma. A few months later, I heard the wives had switched to a different club, also known as a haunt for Alex. And once again, none of them mentioned it to their husbands. Casually, I mentioned to my coworker Mark that I'd seen Tina dancing with Alex at the club. One of Mark's friends had even noticed Alex disappearing around an hour later, right about the same time the group of wives left the club. However, he didn't see Tina leave with them. When confronted, all the wives denied they'd been there, claiming it was a mistake. But a few days later, Mark's friend produced a photo of Alex at the wives' table. Eventually, they admitted they'd been there, but each insisted no one had left with him. Their conflicting stories, though, soon revealed the truth. The wives were reluctant to identify who'd actually gone with Alex. But by the time they finally admitted it was Tina, the damage was done. According to Mark, it had become impossible to trust any of them. During a gathering of the husbands to compare notes, Mark summed up the situation perfectly. He pointed out how the wives had stuck together, lying easily and covering for each other, all while pretending it was just another harmless night out. None of the men could shake the memory of seeing how their wives reacted when Alex approached our table, the way they'd openly condoned Karen's behavior that night, and even sounded envious of her opportunity. That first bachelorette party with Karen had set the tone for what followed. At first, the husbands had welcomed the changes in their own bedrooms as their wives hinted about Karen's encounter with Alex. But a few months later, one of them made a joke about hating the feel of silk sheets, and suddenly, a pattern emerged. They realized they'd each bought the same white silk sheets, identical in color, around the same time. It seemed that after Tina's night with Alex, the husbands couldn't shake the suspicion that their own wives might have been revisiting similar experiences with him. By the end of the year, all 4 couples had divorced. I learned about this when Mark, who was the first to file, reached out to apologize and shared what had happened. One by one, the other husbands came forward to express their regret for their part in that night with Karen, each admitting that maybe if they'd taken a stand for me, it might have changed things for their own marriages too. As for Alex DuPont, he finally angered the wrong person. No one knows exactly who it was, but one night as he left the club with his latest conquest, a masked person came up behind him and hit him with a taser. Before Alex could fully regain his bearings, the attacker struck him hard in the groin, then went for both kneecaps, leaving him screaming in agony. Although the incident was caught on video, no one was ever identified or arrested. There were too many people with reasons to want revenge. Alex would never walk again. As for Karen, The last time we spoke about our relationship was on the day Sarah left for college. By then, we were divorced, and I'd leased out my side of the house, moving to a seaside condo. As I stood in the driveway, watching Sarah leave, Karen asked if she could talk after Sarah was gone. "Paul, I still love you," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I made a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it every day since. I haven't dated or even looked at another man. I know you haven't had anything serious since Chloe, and I was hoping you might move back in with me, just to see how things go." She reached for a necklace around her neck, pulling it off. On the chain was my wedding ring, the same ring I'd handed to Tina on the night Karen had left me. Karen looked at me, her eyes filled with hope. "You still don't understand, do you, Karen?" I said quietly. "That night wasn't a test of my love for you. It was a test of your love for me." "But I do love you," she insisted. "No, you loved what we had together, the life we built. You loved our seemingly perfect marriage, having an ideal husband and kids, a partner who didn't treat you like a trophy, someone who made decisions with you. You enjoyed our intimacy, even if it was less frequent than before. You loved that I cared about your feelings, that I provided stability for your ambitions, and above all, that I trusted you without question. And now you say you love me more than ever, realizing you won't find anyone who could make you as happy as I did. But no one will love you as much as I did, Karen." Karen stood still, gripping the necklace until her knuckles turned white. She looked broken, holding out a symbol of something that no longer existed. "You never really appreciated what we had, and now it's gone," I told her, my voice firm. "I can't be near you again. I'll never give you another chance to hurt me like that. I thought it was us against the world, but you destroyed that when you chose Alex DuPont." Karen began to cry, desperation creeping into her voice. "How many times do I have to tell you I regret it?" "This was never about Alex," I said, shaking my head. "You thought you were lucky to have caught his attention that night. But I was the one who was lucky. When I was at my lowest, your friends tried to convince me that I was foolish. But you showed me something else, that what we had was special. And not because of you, but because of me. You left because my love was stronger. It was my love that wouldn't betray, the bond that made us unique." I paused, remembering that night. As I sat at that table, feeling betrayed and angry, I saw Chloe across the room. She looked over, and when she caught my eye, she smiled. That smile reminded me that I still had a chance at happiness, that I could give my love to someone new. "You opened my eyes, Karen. You set me free." With that, I got into my convertible and drove off, a grin spreading across my face. I couldn't wait to get home. Chloe had left her job and moved in with me just last week, and in that short time, she'd shown me what it means to be needed, to be trusted again. Trust really is a beautiful thing.